It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. I'm Anna Jones. Coming up, how will the budget billions help the health service? The Prime Minister and Chancellor are challenged by NHS workers on how their funding will be used, as Sir Keir Starmer warns the workload for staff is likely to go up rather than down. Well, we'll be joined by the former Health Secretary, Stephen Dorrell, to discuss exactly what's needed to cure an ailing NHS. Also ahead, I'll speak to one of the Brits caught up in Spain's extreme flooding as a year's worth of rain falls in just 8 hours, with a warning that further torrential weather could be on the way. Plus, more claims of sexual abuse against Mohammed Al-Fayed as 400 alleged victims and witnesses come forward in the investigation into the former Harrods owner. And after a long and winding road, we'll hear from the father and son team who helped restore a recording console that was once used by the Beatles, but later found in a skip. It's now expected to fetch a cool £2.2 million at auction. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Hello, very good evening. So it's just a day on from Labour's first budget in 14 years, and one in which they raised taxes by some £40 billion. Well, today the government have been trying to set out how those billions will be used to improve public services, starting with the NHS. Well, the Prime Minister and Chancellor were challenged by health service staff to explain just how they plan to relieve pressure on the service. But Sir Keir Starmer admitted that despite the financial spend, the workload for staff is likely to go up rather than down. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has more.
Taking her budget to the country, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister heading to the Midlands, one day after announcing their overhaul for the economy. But so far, it's not been a smooth ride.
And then, the scan is done here.
This is where much of the new spending will be going, billions more in funding to come for the NHS. But the scale of the borrowing needed has already unnerved the markets. And that was paired with tax hikes that voters were told not to fear.
Prime Minister, for years you told voters that Labour would fix public services, not by tax rises or borrowing, but from growth. And yesterday's budget completely undermined, ran totally counter to that argument and that promise. Why should people trust you?
What we did in the budget yesterday was do the only thing that a responsible government would do, which was to fix the damage that we inherited.
You're conveniently forgetting the central argument you made ahead of the election. That was why growth was going to pay for public services. That is why you argued that Labour could be trusted. That is why you argued you were different from Jeremy Corbyn. And now you've just forgotten about that argument.
Not at all. This is a budget for growth. And as you'll see from the growth forecasts, the significant growth in the early years, it flattens a bit, and then over 10 years there's growth again. That's not the height of our ambition.
Surrounded by the budget's big winners. And now, watch this exchange. Here, the Prime Minister promising staff there could be even more cash to come.
Patient safety is at risk.
Yeah.
How can we have some assurance that, the money will go towards that?
What we did in the budget yesterday is the first step, the down payment, if you like, down that road to make sure that you can do your jobs better and we can have the NHS that we need.
The Prime Minister clear that not every problem in the NHS will be fixed in this budget. There's a queue of other public services that will need more cash too, from defence to education, social care. After the biggest tax-raising budget in decades, will this government still need to come back for more?
And if so, from where? Businesses have been drilling into the numbers for the tax hike announced this week. Already clear this extra cost is going to hurt.
Were you surprised by the scale of taxes put on businesses like yours?
Yeah, it's crazy. For an SME that's employing, why tax being employee? Because we are. Deidre & Sorin is a company of people. We employ.
So working people who are here might get smaller pay rises than they would have done because of this tax rise.
It's going to end up to the employment, yes.
friction over tax hikes, and the markets are worried about extra borrowing. There's big holes left to fill. Is there any way through? Sam Coates, Sky News, Coventry.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the money for the NHS. Former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell is here with me. Very good evening to you. Thanks so much for coming in. So the NHS in England is the big winner from this budget, isn't it? £22.6 billion cash injection over 2 years. It's an awful lot of money. Do you think it'll make a difference?
Well, of course, more money will make a difference. That's true. But I think we need to be very careful about these numbers that are being thrown around. First of all, 22 billion over 2 years is 11 billion a year. Why not announce 5 years and call it 55 billion? It's 11 billion a year, which in a budget of 190 billion is a little over 1%. So it's not huge.
And yet, it's a 4% rise for the NHS, isn't it? That's pretty generous.
Yes, it is, because what the government are doing is re-announcing what they've already announced. They've already announced, rightly in my view, that they're accepting the pay review bodies for staff. And they've already announced that they're providing more money because they need to on waiting lists. So all of that was baked into the number. And I think the key way of explaining it is that before Rachel Reeves got up yesterday, the expected spend was 179. The spend when she sat down was 181. That's an increase of £2 billion. A big sum of money, but not 22 billion.
So what you're saying is that this money will allow the NHS to kind of stay stable, which is something the government is sort of acknowledging, isn't it? That there are these increased costs. There's the increased wage bills, which the government say they've agreed to prevent more strikes, and because they think that the staff are worth it. There's also the increased price of drugs, because inflation is hitting those, and other issues like our ageing population. There are more demands on the NHS. Are you just saying that this money will cover all of those? I'm
saying that it will cover that, with a tiny bit extra, around 1% extra. But what it isn't is a huge get-out-of-jail card for the NHS.
However, there's also this separate money that's been announced, this £3.1 billion increase in the capital budget. And we're told that's going to go towards various things, not just things like repairs and also adaptations for the rack concrete that's affected some hospitals, but also it's going to go towards equipment, surgical hubs. I mean, that could make a difference, couldn't it, to productivity?
It's extremely welcome. It addresses an issue that the Darzi review identified, that the previous government underinvested in the NHS. All of that is true. It's rather less impressive when I tell you that having announced that capital increase yesterday, today, the government announced that it's transferring 900 million this year out of capital into current to prop up this year's spending. So it's doing what the public sector always does, which is to announce capital spending and then not spend it on capital because it needs it to cover today's revenue costs.
West Streeting has set this pledge out about 40,000 extra appointments a week. Do you think that's achievable, given what we've heard today?
I think we don't... he hasn't yet convinced me that he knows how that can be delivered. It does need extra money. There is some extra money. I'm not saying there's none, but there's nowhere near as much as the rhetoric suggests. What we haven't heard at all from the government yet is the promise of reform and using things more efficiently. Again, Darzi quite rightly said the real challenge for the health service is productivity. That's using money to deliver better care for patients. And we haven't heard anything from the government yet about how it's going to do that.
Well, no, although we have heard from the Health Secretary saying that productivity is really important and that the taxpayers should expect that, given the amount of money that's going in. And you talk about reform because there is reform planned. We're going to learn a little bit more about the plans come the spring, aren't we? Will that, do you think, we don't know what it involves, but will it involve more money?
Well, the truth is that the 10-year plan that's going to be announced in the spring is timed to coincide with the Treasurer's review of public expenditure for the whole of this Parliament. So I think it's likely that the government will announce more money. Indeed, I think it's going to have to, because one of the other things that came out today is that, or actually it was yesterday, the OBR pointed out that although there is more money for the health service next year, actually the growth next year over this year is below the long-term trend rate of growth within the NHS. And Paul Johnson from the IFS has been saying, looking forward, that the wider public sector for the second half of this Parliament is wildly unrealistic in terms of the planned levels of expenditure. They simply haven't adjusted the ones they inherited from their predecessors.
OK, so a lot of questions for further down the track. And in terms of reform, a lot of the idea is to try to take some of the pressure off hospitals by having more care in the community. Does that cost money as you navigate that transfer?
Yes, of course. The answer to that is yes, it must. The government are quite right to use that argument. The scepticism, I guess, for those of us that have been involved in this for a number of years, is I myself used that argument when I was Health Secretary in John Major's government. We haven't yet done it. And another of the announcements they made yesterday was around social care. Social care gets 600 million. Again, a lot of money, but only enough to stop it going backwards.
So why did you not do it under John Major? Why have subsequent health secretaries not done it if everyone realises that this will make a big difference?
Well, the answer is I and all of my successors have tried, and it's much easier to describe than it is to do. What I think is essential to understand is that if you want to transfer resources into prevention, into supporting people in the community, keeping them out of the NHS and in particular out of hospitals when they don't need to be there, that does, as you quite rightly say, involve investment in the front line, in community services. And it's always the urgent squeezes out the important. If you've got patient load coming into the hospitals, people say this is urgent, it's got to be done. Whereas if you invested in proper prevention and support in the community, actually many of those people would never appear in hospital in the first place.
And Wes Streeting is saying he's making a big play to make prevention a priority. So what's your verdict then? Given resources are limited, what do you make of what the government has done and how optimistic are you for the NHS now?
So in addition to being a former health secretary, I'm also a former Treasury Minister, so I know how to do arithmetic with public money. And I don't deny the government are they have inherited a very tight corner from their predecessors. Am I optimistic? I wouldn't have been in politics as long as I have if I wasn't essentially inclined to be optimistic, to look for solutions. But it's a very tight corner for the health service and, in truth, for the rest of the public sector and public services. Without growth, it's very difficult to see how any of this can be made to work. And the OBR, once again, was very cautious in its predictions of the effect of this budget on long-term growth.
Well, very interesting to get your take on things. Stephen Dorrell, former Health Secretary, we really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Now, while the government wanted to spend the day focusing on funding for the NHS following the budget, it was actually a new inheritance tax measure for farms that became a major point of controversy. The National Farmers Union slammed yesterday's budget as disastrous for family farms, saying it'll deny future generations the ability to carry on producing British food. Fraser Maud reports.
I really am, towards the end of my tether.
Do these people not understand where food comes from in this country?
The industry is on its knees. It's on its knees.
My primary concern is actually for my kids here.
Halloween isn't the only thing giving our farmers a scare this week. Many say the first Labour budget for over a decade has been disastrous for small farms and their future. Paul Tompkins raises a herd of 400 dairy cows on a 300-acre farm near York. He and thousands like him fear that the new £1 million limit on inheritance tax relief on farmland will rob his children of their farming legacy.
I went into the budget feeling quite optimistic, but came out feeling completely winded. I thought that this budget was going to be about helping working people. Yet, if that was the desire, then why am I worried that we're going to be fleeced as soon as a death happens in our family?
The government's assertion is that only around 2,000 of the largest estates a year will be affected. Some financial experts agree.
It still means they'll be significantly more generously treated than the rest of us, and still more generously treated, actually, than farms used to be in decades passed, the changes will affect actually a remarkably small number of some of the most valuable farms. The majority will still not be affected by this.
But those criticising the announcement say up to 70,000 farms could suffer. DEFRA figures show about 3/4 of England's farms are smaller holdings of less than 100 hectares. Last year, England's farms made an average profit of £86,000, but 17% of them made no profit at all.
One way to avoid inheritance tax is to hand down your assets 7 years before you die. The problem with that, of course, is that no one knows exactly when that's going to be. And it also means that the farmer then can't borrow against his assets or apply for certain environmental schemes.
A U-turn on the announcement seems unlikely, but farmers like Paul maintain the only fair and reasonable thing the Chancellor can do to protect our farming future and keep food costs down is to completely reverse her decision. Fraser Maud, Sky News, York.
Well, let's get the reaction now of the Vice President of the National Farmers Union, Rachel Hallos, who joins me now live. Very good evening to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. What do you make of this inheritance tax measure, and what are other farmers saying to you as well?
Well, I'm actually up in Scotland. I'm away from my own home farm at the moment, and I'm at a sale up in the west coast of Scotland, a Solaire Cattle Society sale, and every single farmer that I have seen, these are people that I've known for years, have come straight up to me and said, what on earth is going on? How are we supposed to be able to deal with this? How do we ensure that our business survives? How are we supposed to invest in our business and grow, which we thought this is what government wanted us to do? So I think, listening to the reports that you've already said, people are just baffled by how on earth this is part of the plan, to be quite honest. The new government came in, we've been seesawing with previous governments. We were told that we were going to get stability. We were told that the government needed growth. We needed to generate this income for the country. We're up for that. How does this work? So if that's how I feel, that's how farmers are feeling, and it's this frustration and actually this betrayal, which is a bit of a strong word, but that's how it feels.
The government, for their part, would say they are continuing to protect small family farms. They say that this measure will leave 3/4 of farms unaffected. And a lot of people watching might say it's fair to make sure that wealthy farmers are treated the same as everybody else.
The wealthy farmer line always really does get me, to be quite honest. The type of farms that this is protecting are not viable farms, in all honesty, or the vast majority of them will not be viable farms. So for a farm to be viable it has to be of a decent size. So the type of farms that the government has actually used to form these calculations, they're not viable business propositions, or the vast majority aren't. So you have to grow your business. You have to get bigger to be able to survive in this industry that seems to be being pulled in all directions. So I'm not entirely certain who the government's protecting here. When you talk about wealthy farmers, I'm not entirely certain what a wealthy farmer looks like. The farmers that I've been speaking to this evening, the farmers that I've been receiving phone calls from, these are working people, hardworking people that are growing their business to try and produce food, do the right thing, and create a sustainable business for the future. They may have assets, but they are very cash poor. I can promise you that. I am a farmer. I know.
The government's also keen to stop very rich people avoiding tax by buying up farms to gain some kind of tax protection or protection from inheritance tax. Do you think that is a reasonable step to prevent that? I mean, do you welcome that?
I would welcome anything that is sensible. This is not sensible. This needs this needs to stop. It needs looking at. It needs reassessment, and I think there are other ways of doing this. I think what you are actually doing with this policy is going to penalise those family farms that are trying to build their business to deliver the growth that we've been told that we need to deliver for this country, to do all the things that we've just been talking about. Your previous report about the NHS actually needs. We need to look at food security. We've been told food security is national security. The world is looking in a very different place at the moment, whether it's from war or whether it's from climate activity that's causing major flooding like we've just seen in Spain, where we get most of our salads from. There have got to be better ways of doing this, and I'm not sure that the government fully understands the implications of the actions that they have taken in this budget.
So what do you think the implications are? What impact do you think this will have?
I know for a fact that there are people starting to make decisions about what happens next with their business. It really is as simple as that.
So meaning they might sell off part of their land, for example, to raise money for potential inheritance tax in the future. What kind of decisions do you think?
So the decisions that some of the decisions that would have to be made to actually fulfil this requirement would have to sell off some of that farm, which people say, well, that's absolutely fine. You've got a bit left, but that makes the business unviable then. That's the problem. And quite often, some of these farms already have charges on them because they've already had to pay somebody else out of the business because the business isn't viable. The food business isn't viable anymore to actually sustain that wider family. So those discussions have already had to have been had. So the whole concept of having to borrow even more money, and then obviously you don't necessarily borrow against an asset these days. There's the affordability question. If a business isn't viable with the land, once the land's been sold, how can you actually borrow the money because you can't pay the loan back? So this is really complicated stuff. And I think government really need to sit down with the people that actually understand the implications of this. So we do not find ourselves in a situation, because as Keir Starmer said when he spoke at the NFU conference, replacing a family farm is really hard to do. And we may find ourselves where some of these family farms go, and then what? What do we do about food security then?
You talk about food security. What about food prices? Could it be that prices could go up because farmers need more income?
Well, ultimately, the reality is that food prices have actually been kept at a level due to money that has gone into the industry. That money hasn't stayed there. It's actually subsidised, for want of a better description, food prices. And if you look at the other things that have happened through the budget, whether it's national insurance contributions, other pressures on businesses, there's a big supply chain feeding into agriculture, and agriculture feeds into a huge supply chain itself. Somebody somewhere is going to have to pay the difference because it's not there in the supply chain. So, the question is where? So is it the consumer? Now, that does not help anybody, does it?
OK, well, Rachel Hallos, we must leave it there. But thanks very much indeed for joining us. Vice President of the NFU, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, lawyers say more than 400 people have now come forward with allegations of being victims or witnessing sexual misconduct by the late Harrods boss, Mohammed Al-Fayed. The Justice for Harrods Survivors group says there is an industrial scale of abuse. Rob Harris reports.
3 more survivors of Mohammed Al-Fayed going public. Jen, Lindsay and Gemma. Seeking justice. Trying to expose their former boss as a predatory monster. And now urging a boycott of Harrods. As the Justice for Harrods Survivors group reveals, more than 400 people, including alleged victims and potential witnesses, have now come forward. Catherine, once a personal assistant to Al-Fayed, telling of confronting the billionaire.
He tried to force himself upon me in his office, and I fought him off and told him that, under no uncertain terms, that I was only a PA and that wouldn't be happening. And I was basically out of a job shortly after that. He came in the next day and my desk had gone.
14 months after his death, the scope of the alleged abuse by Al-Fayed is expanding across his business empire. Ronnie Gibbons is the first former Fulham player to waive her anonymity, telling of being trapped and assaulted in his office above Harrods after being summoned from the football club she captained.
As difficult as it's been very empowering, and I know that by speaking out we are making it harder for this kind of behaviour to be tolerated anywhere. I know we are making it easier for others to speak up.
Survivors who thought they were alone, now united in a mission with lawyers to expose Al-Fayed.
Nearly all of the ladies that we act for have said that nobody's ever listened to them. Nobody's actually taken what they said seriously.
The formal legal process against Harrods has now begun, and lawyers are anticipating hundreds more claims. Harrods continues to insist it is a very different organisation to the one Mohammed Al-Fayed owned until 2010, and that it is utterly appalled by the allegations of sexual misconduct.
It's not swift settlement sought by survivors, but all the evidence gathered against Mohammed Al-Fayed. And lawyers are appealing for more alleged victims and those who facilitated the abuse to come forward. Rob Harris, Sky News, Central London.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight, we'll speak to the British man living in Spain who filmed these pictures of the flash flooding disaster as forecasters warn of more rain. Women in England and Wales are now protected from anti-abortion protesters near clinics, but the new law has left a question mark. Plus, the father and son who helped rescue a piece of music history.
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
As America votes, win, 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 win.
Get ready for an election night like no other.
Join our team stateside
as we get close to the action
and bring you the results as they arrive.
with full reaction and comprehensive analysis guiding you through the night.
In an election which could have huge consequences around the world.
America Votes, Election Night Live. Get the full story first on Sky News.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Were you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited. I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her. Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty? I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back to Spain now, where more than 150 people have been killed in severe flash flooding in the east of the country. Major search and rescue operations are continuing after the region experienced a year's worth of rainfall in just 8 hours. Well, communities in and around Valencia are assessing the devastation, with the Spanish Prime Minister declaring the region a disaster zone. Pedro Sanchez warned today there are likely to be many more bodies trapped in vehicles. And people living in some of the worst hit areas have been told to brace for even more rainfall. Well, those pictures you just saw were filmed by Andrew Pilkington, who joins me now. He moved to Spain from the UK 15 years ago. Thanks so much for talking to us tonight, Andrew. How have you been affected by the floods? Give us a sense of how the area where you are has been affected.
Well, we've actually not been too bad. As you've seen from the images, it was a lot of waters passed through the village. But we were actually safe at home. I didn't film the images. They were ones that were passed via social media in our community. We followed the advice to stay at home. So from 3:30 yesterday afternoon, we were at home watching it from the window. And then basically the village, as you can see, became cut off because we're pretty much an island. We're connected by bridges to other municipalities. And so then we were out without power for a long period of time, without phone connections. And then our water came back at lunchtime today. So it's been a difficult situation, but certainly not as difficult as people nearby have had.
Well, yeah, I mean, were many homes flooded near you? Because we've seen some awful pictures of homes devastated in the region.
Yeah, obviously with that amount of water coming down, it's impossible for there not to be water coming in the house. We had water coming in through the terraces, but nothing that caused too much damage. The local schools have been flooded because they're on a slightly lower plane to us. And then anywhere closer to the water, obviously, was having water come in. Friends who are 5 minutes away, their whole basement was completely flooded up to probably about 20 centimetres deep of a 100 square metre basement. So yeah, it's just a lot of water in a short amount of time.
Well, yeah, and as you say, you were advised to stay at home. The Prime Minister, again, has urged people not to leave their homes. How hard, though, if you were to try and get around, would it be to do that? I mean, what's happened to the roads? Are you still cut off where you are?
So we've got some of our connection back. My wife actually went to work today. She was obliged to go into work. She only works in the next village over, but it was still difficult. Our major route in and out is still shut off because they're trying to secure the bridge to get across one of the waterways. But then there's huge tailbacks trying to get in and out of certain villages because there's so many roads which have been cut off. There's only maybe 1 or 2 roads in and out of certain places, so everybody's trying to take the same road to get to second residences, to get to family, even just to get home. And that's causing huge backups and problems. And that's part of the reason why the government is telling us to stay home, is to try to reduce the traffic and the blockages, because emergency services, emergency crews need to work. And having people out on the roads unnecessarily is just going to cause more and more problems.
I think they're also worried about more bad weather to come as well, aren't they? Are you concerned about that?
Yeah, so the fronts move north, and right now Castellón, which is north of Valencia, is getting hit quite heavily, not quite as heavily as the south of Valencia. We had rain, we had storms forecast for 6 o'clock this evening, and nothing came through in the end. And now they're forecasting more rain. Obviously, it won't be anything near as torrential, but with the amount of damage and infrastructure problems that we've got, any more water, any more rain is not going to really help us in any way.
And I'm pleased to hear that you've not been too badly affected personally, but it is really shocking news from the area where you live. More than 150 people thought to have died, and fears that number could rise. How are people feeling there? There must be such a feeling of shock.
Yeah, it's a sense of devastation here. I mean, we've been lucky where we are exactly, but we've had friends who have been directly affected by it because they're from this village, but they were working in the next village. They couldn't get home, so they spent 36 hours sleeping in cars, sleeping in offices. A colleague of my wife's was stuck in a warehouse where he was basically watching people die in their cars because he saw them get caught up in the water as they came off the motorways, and there was nothing you could do. So there's a sense of desperation, there's a sense of devastation, and there's this huge sense of helplessness for people like us, because we want to try and go out and help, but we know that we're probably, in some ways, we're actually going to be causing more problems. So local groups are trying to band together now to find ways to get to nearby villages like Chiva, which is 10 minutes down the road, to see how we can help there. But we're waiting for it to be well organised rather than just trying to get there ourselves show up on spec. We're waiting for that organisation because there's this devastation and everything, but there's also a lot of hope and a lot of motivation to try and help each other out as much as possible.
And you've lived in Spain for 15 years. Have you ever seen anything close to this before?
No. We get the Gota Fria. It used to be every year. Recently, in the last few years, it's been nowhere near as heavy, as we're normally what it is persistent rain over the course of a week rather than everything in one day. So in my 15 years, I've not seen it. My parents in 20 years haven't seen anything. Talking to our friends here, some will talk about in 2000 there was a big flood, in 82, but no one really in living memory has anything that sees the amount of water and the speed at which it rose to wash through the gullies and everything. That as you see with the images, to move the number of cars and the number of vehicles and the amount of debris at that rate, nobody can really has any living memory of those kind of things.
Yeah, really terrifying weather event. Andrew Pilkington, we really appreciate your time and good luck. Hope that things improve as quickly as possible. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Good night.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight, why not everyone's convinced that new protest buffer zones around abortion clinics will protect women from harassment. court has seen pictures of the father of Sara Sharif leaving the country with family members after the 10-year-old's death last year. Irfan Sharif is accused of killing his young daughter. He, along with his wife, Benash Batul, and his brother, Faisal Malik, have all denied murder. Well, Sky's Shaman Freeman-Powell is here. So, Shaman, what more can you tell us then?
Well, Sara Sharif's father, Irfan Sharif, her stepmother, Benash Batul, and her uncle, Faisal Malik, are all accused of subjecting Sara to a campaign of abuse which would ultimately lead to her death. What we already understood is that police discovered Sara's body last year in August following a phone call made to police by Sara's father, Irfan Sharif. We now understand that that phone call was made whilst he was in Pakistan. However, today, jurors were shown CCTV footage, which gave a little bit more insight into the family's movements ahead of that phone call. So we can see, for example, doorbell footage of the family vehicle leaving a property on Hammond Road. We can also see the vehicle arriving at a car park barrier at Heathrow Airport. We see the family walking through security terminals as well at one point. And by family, I mean Irfan Sharif, Benash Batul, Faisal Malik, along with Sara Sharif's 5 siblings at the time, aged between 1 and 13. We then see them queuing for security, walking through terminals. They essentially looking like an ordinary family, going about their business, about to enjoy a family holiday. But we now know that this was taking place while Sara Sharif's body lay at a bunk bed in that property on Hammond Road. Jurors were also shown WhatsApp exchanges between Sara's stepmother, Benash Batul, and her sister, Kandila Sabuhi. These messages were between 2020 and 2023. We could see in these exchanges that Batul had told her sister about the abuse that she claims Sara was experiencing at the hands of her father. She spoke of Sara being a child that was naughty, rude and rebellious, the fact that she was accusing Sara of having cut up her father's clothes, hidden keys and also torn up documents. She even talks at one point of wanting to report this behaviour to the police, but jurors were shown messages which showed her sister had told her to calm down and not rush in any of these decisions. Now it comes as jurors had previously been told that Sara Sharif had been subjected to abuse. She had dozens of injuries, including burns and bite marks too, but all 3 of the defendants deny murder, as well as another charge of causing or allowing the death of a child.
Shaman, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. It's now an offence to protest outside abortion clinics in England and Wales. A new law has taken effect, establishing 150-metre protection zones, stopping campaigners from harassing or influencing women seeking to terminate their pregnancy. But there's still a question mark about whether activists who pray silently will be breaking the law. Sky's Sarina Barker-Singh reports.
As divisive on the streets as it was in Parliament. So-called safe zones around abortion clinics were signed into law 19 months ago, but only come into force today. Kendall is a nurse working at a clinic in central London and is hoping that the harassment she says she's still experiencing from anti-choice protesters will come to an end today.
We've been called names as we come into work. We've had instances where they've tried to physically block people from coming into the clinic. They might do things like sing hymns or have kind of images of the Virgin Mary. Women coming in for treatment are often very vulnerable. They might be in an emotional situation. This could be one of the hardest decisions they've ever had to make. People telling them, calling them names or passing judgment on them or making them feel a particular way about it is something that's really, really distressing.
So what's prohibited within 150 metres of abortion clinics? It will now be illegal to influence a person's decision to access services, obstruct access, or cause harassment, alarm or distress to someone using or working at an abortion clinic. Police will also have discretion to stop silent prayer if they suspect an intent to obstruct or cause harassment, something that's concerned pro-life campaigners.
Is this really about protest, though, or do you think those people are actually trying to stop abortions from happening?
They're trying to offer support to women, so I don't think it's fair to say that every woman that goes into an abortion clinic is happy about that. I think pro-choicers would agree with me on that too. And so if they can be given resources or something else to help them make a different choice, then I think that's something that we really ought to be doing.
I would also die in a ditch for the right to protest, as somebody who has protested many things. But there is a time and a place. People who have completely the opposite view to me on the availability of abortion services have every right to hold those views. They do not have the right, and I'm pleased to say they no longer have the right, to enforce that on women seeking healthcare.
Some Labour MPs had taken steps to try and decriminalise abortion altogether. Pro-choice campaigners are hoping now they're in government that could be a reality soon. Sarina Barker-Singh, Sky News, Westminster.
Coming up on the UK tonight, a piece of music history goes up for auction. We're going to be speaking to the father and son who helped save it. And we've got the sport for you. Manchester United close in on their new manager. We'll discuss what this means for the 13-time Premier League champions next.
That has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides. And it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it, it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits going in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with her, I know.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. Coming up, saved from a skip and now up for auction. We'll tell you how much cash you'll need to own a piece of Beatles history. When I said saved from a skip, I didn't mean Jamie with the sport.
Charming introduction, that I have to say.
He's here with me now. A lot of chat about Manchester United, without a manager at the moment, of course,
Yes.
but that could be about to change.
And indeed change very, very soon indeed, Anna. Yes, Ruben Amorim is the man. He's currently the manager at Sporting Lisbon and has done an incredibly impressive job there. We're expecting confirmation perhaps as early as tomorrow. I mean, when he took over Sporting Lisbon, they were a shambles, to be quite frank. The following season, he won the Portuguese title with him, has won another Portuguese title since, and he's had big clubs sniffing around in the likes of Liverpool, Barcelona, Manchester City as well, all sort of eyeing up Ruben Amorim potentially as their next manager. But it looks as if Manchester United are going to be the ones to get him. Incredibly impressive CV, incredibly impressive young man, speaks fluent English. So, look, it looks as if United are about to get their man, and as I said, tomorrow we're hopefully expecting it to be rubber stamped.
And what do you think he could do for the club? Could he take them back up to the heights of English football?
I mean, that's certainly what Manchester United fans will be hoping for. He's got a big in tray when he gets to Old Trafford. They are a mess, quite frankly, at the moment, Manchester United. There's a lot of problems to sort out. It's 11 years since Sir Alex Ferguson left Manchester United. They've kind of been trying to find their Pep Guardiola, their Jurgen Klopp, you know, a man who can be at the helm for a long time and get them back to the very heights that Fergie got them to, obviously. They haven't found that since. Managers have won trophies there, the likes of Louis van Gaal, Jose Mourinho, even Eric Ten Hag won trophies at Manchester United, but they haven't had a manager for longer than 3 years in those 11 years. They'll be hoping that this man can be a long-term Manchester United manager. And what I would say is this is a bit of a line in the sand. This is a bit of a blank canvas because Ineos, the new owners of Manchester United, Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Sir Dave Brailsford, they're pretty impressive and they will have done their due diligence. They will have identified Ruben Amorim as the man that they want to take over. I interviewed Kasper Schmeichel Christmas of last year, obviously son of Peter Schmeichel, a Manchester United legend, Premier League winner himself. He had been at Nice, which is also owned by Ineos, and he said, these guys, everything they touch turns to gold. They will have success at Manchester United. It may take a bit of time, but they will be successful. So I think Ruben Amorim is clearly the man that they have identified as the man that will bring that success back to Old Trafford. Whether he does it or not is going to be fascinating to see. But as we wait for the white smoke to emerge from Old Trafford, the world of sport still tumbles on.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
How do you feel about yourself as a black woman competing in the sport? Do you feel like anything has changed, improved, gone worse?
Having athletes like you, I think it's really empowering and really inspiring. But I think, you know, it also comes with its challenges. In every aspect of the sport, like the coaching, like I think we can do a better job, and it's nice that we're pushing the barriers and seeing black females at the top, but it's not easy for us. Just getting us into these spaces, I feel like is really important, like having our voices heard and having our needs met and people kind of understanding it on all levels.
I think my narrative is different depending on who I talk to. It is important that we understand that our narratives sometimes is what we think of ourselves and also is what other people think of us. And sometimes they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing, so we all have to be kind of cognizant of those messages and images that we put out of ourselves. Because it might not be what we think it is or what we think it should be. And I just suffer from that a lot, I think, in my career, was thinking I had, you know, almost having this negative perception of myself because I thought that's what other people thought of me. And I think that did a lot of damage. So I think it really is important how you see yourself, but also have a realistic view of what maybe other people do think of you as well, so you don't sell yourself.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now to a piece of music history used to make the final album recorded by the Beatles that was almost lost forever. The one-of-a-kind console mixed and laid down the Abbey Road album, which was released in September 1969. The studio later gave the console to a school and eventually it wound up in a skip before being rescued but then left unused for years. Well, a team led by a father and son then spent 4 years painstakingly restoring the desk to its former glory. And now it's listed on the online music marketplace Reverb for £2.25 million. And I'm very pleased to say that father and son restoration team Hamish and Malcolm Jackson join me now from Chorleywood in Hertfordshire. So a very good evening to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Malcolm, this has been on quite a journey, this music console, hasn't it? Tell us a little bit about how it ended up in your hands.
Well, luckily I knew Abbey Road, would work with them for a bit. I also knew Mike Hedges, who was the big producer at Abbey Road, and also knew Brian Gibson, who was the technician who looked after the desk when it was at Abbey Road. And so we had a good start, but it was amazing that Mike had asked us to look at the Beatles console, because we didn't know what it was, but when it came to us, it was a bit of a mess, and it had lots of components and things that were in boxes, and so we had to put it all together. It was quite a thing to do.
Well, yeah, and Hamish, I'll ask you a little bit about the work you had to do on it, but Explain to us how it ended up in a skip and how someone recognised that it shouldn't be in a skip and recovered it.
Well, it wasn't actually all in a skip. Mike Hedges had most of it because he was known as the TG man because he loved the sound of the console. But some of it ended up in the skip but by the school. And it was actually an engineer who was walking past the skip and saw it, noticed it in there and liked the look of the knobs and thought they would look really good on his guitar. He was a guitar player. And so he fished them out and years later, he sold them to Terry Britton, who was a songwriter, worked with Tina Turner. And Terry and Mike knew each other. So when we had the console, all the bits together, we put it all together with his parts and came up with the whole thing. So it was quite lucky, actually. Yeah.
God, that's an extraordinary story. And so, Malcolm, when you got all those different bits together, how exciting did you find this? I mean, how would you sum up how special this music console is?
Well, all the bits were made by EMI, and they used military precision to get the right components and the right sound. And it took about 4 years to put everything together because we had to remake some of the parts. And all the parts that we made were made by UK companies.
We had to reverse engineer parts that were absolutely to EMI spec, checked by Brian Gibson. And it was the reason for its sound was really because they designed something that was and the next generation after the valve technology, which was very much sounding like this if you had too much going on. So this console made it more smooth and mellow sounding, and they were able to manipulate the sound in ways which they couldn't do before with the old valve console. So when they were constantly redeveloping between the engineers at Abbey Road and the EMI factory in Hayes, they were constantly improving. And they came up with what was meant to be, it was designed to be the best sounding console ever.
But the manual had disappeared. We had nothing to go on. We had to go into every component and reverse engineer it. And we had a team of techs doing it, headed up by Brian Gibson, who, of course, then went to Mike Hedges to make sure that everything was okay. So they were very, very strict.
Good. Well, it sounds like you've done an enormous amount of work on it, and now it's up for sale with a cool over £2 million price tag on it. Who would you like to, very briefly, who would you like to buy it? Would you like a musician to pick it up?
Absolutely, has to be a working. It's a working piece of equipment. Yeah. It needs to stay in a working environment, not a collector, not sitting in a glass box.
Whoever buys it now it'll be the best studio in the world. Really.
Okay. We have to leave it there. Malcolm Jackson and Hamish Jackson, well done for all your work. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Okay.
And that's it from the UK Tonight. Join us for The World next.